Bom dia! Sejam muito bem-vindos à Casa do Seguro.
You're all welcome to Casa dos Seguros at COP30, a strategic hub for connections for business to foster insurance in this climate transition. My name is Gabriel Pinheiro, and I thank you all for being here. Throughout all the days on our agenda, we have received governmental authorities, leaders from business organizations, and international organization representatives. We are offering simultaneous interpretations. Headsets are available in the entrance of the auditorium. Please pick up yours before we start the talks. The entire agenda of Casa do Seguro at COP30 can be reached in our website or through the scanning of the QR code that you see on the screen. The supporters of the House is made of companies that have an important role in the climate transition for the ESG agenda. This morning, the program will be from Marsh that will open with talks on well-being and a healthy environment to make urban life more intelligent and sustainable. For the opening of the morning session, I invite Mr. Eugenio Pascal, Chairman of Marsh McLennan. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to be here at Casa dos Seguros, and the air conditioning is perfect here, but not only the air conditioning and this beautiful house that was built at Belém for COP30. In the background, there is a grounding that is spectacular that was built and constructed for almost a year. Since last year, we started this project, and we are very proud that Marsh McLennan is one of the supporters with CNseg, and I thank CNseg for giving these opportunities, not only for us, but for the insurance sector to be a main actor. And I want to show what are these important foundation. We have had several important panels promoted by Casa dos Seguros, by CNseg, throughout a very intense way. We have talked, we have had several meetings talking about the public agencies, the supporters, and all the kinds of industries that put together and that are part of our market, the finance sector, BNDES contributing with all aspects that can connect, all that represent this collectiveness on a joint effort here, what we can do in order to make things concrete towards actions that are necessary for this COP30. And this makes us very happy and satisfied, so I thank you all. This morning, we had a very diverse audience here with the project. Can you give me Negraiar project? It's a spectacular project, and every day they have presented from 9 to 10, and I invite you to watch their presentation tomorrow. It's made by people from the region that are fighting on issues related to vulnerability. Why am I telling this today? Because our panel today is related to what we've seen on our vulnerable population. We are talking about health. We are talking about education, prosperity. And what is this related to resilient urban locations? Everything. If we observe the events that have happened and what are the consequences post incidents, drama happens and hits this population. And then we have a huge responsibility in the sense of putting a lot more effort to build resilient urban centers. We have 87% of the Brazilian population living in urban centers. In these urban centers, more than 5,300 municipalities. This is a strong dimension of the prospection work and fragmentation work of all that. Above all this, we have 12,000 shanty towns, or the facades, that's how they call, and 30 million people spread throughout the country without treated water, many people without sewage collection. So besides being vulnerable people, we don't have the basic services for this population. So we have this strong sense of responsibility of our role here. So I'm emphasizing vulnerability, and when the vulnerability is high, we increase the inequality gap. And understanding the magnitude of the disasters and the responsibility, and understanding highways, railways, transports, airports. I can't count all the examples that were mentioned. All of them impact the lives of populations, impacting strongly the economy of municipalities, states, and our country. And they are hindering prosperity to the country, but we have a way. And this pathway is being treated, and we are living in Brazil the main moment for infrastructure investment. We have the major pipeline or plan for the private sector with more than 750 billion in investments, reaching about 80% of public-private partnerships in Brazil. And that gives us, I'm not saying that the solutions are complete, but we have a lot of challenges to overcome. And we've seen these challenges coming from the disasters. They require renegotiation, re-agreement on top of the contracts that we have. And also we have to follow all the situations, but there are huge challenges ahead of us. But we do have concessionaires that are potential declining to participate on new projects due to the adaptation challenges that we have. So railways, highways with construction such as tunnels, bridges, pathways that were conceived on a technology that were not thought thinking about the disasters. And these are the challenges. And how can we fund this adaptation? We have asked ourselves a lot about this, and how will the insurance sector be the inducer of these fundings? How can the insurance sector minimize the insecurity of the agreements or contracts we have today with the concessionaires? How can we strengthen all that? This is a message that we will hear on our panel today. And I remember the COP president, Correia do Lago, talking about mutirão, joint effort. And that's a collective effort trying to find ways, uniting the society, not only public power, private power, society, and solutions. And I say that the solutions exist with all that we have discussed, with the creativity we have in our organizations. And now we have to go for action and implementation. And that's the objective of COP30. And the time is now. And I hope our panel today is rich, covering all these topics, and that we can reflect and leave this room today with an action plan so that all of us can engage on a more just world. And now we will continue this panel, and thank you all. Thank you very much. In the first panel of this morning round, we will talk about building urban resilience in Latin America, exploiting state-of-the-art solutions to make cities more smarter and more feasible to live, innovative solutions for transportation, for the green areas, highlighting well-succeeded pilot projects and future opportunities. In order to start the talks, I will invite Rodrigo Corradi, Deputy Executive Secretary of ICLEI Brazil. Carla França, Planning Territory Analyst of CNM. The Ambassador Antônio da Costa e Silva, International Supervisor of the Ministry of Cities. Amy Barnes, Climate and Sustainability Head of Marsh Global. André Dabos, Infrastructure and Construction Director of Marsh Brazil. The floor is yours. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to be here with all of you, where we have had wonderful topics talking about adaptation, how the insurance market can contribute for the development of infrastructure in a general way. And today, the panel is dedicated for building urban resilience. But before all that, I want to say thanks to Marsh McLennan for the invitation and the opportunity to be here in such a special moment in my life. This is the first COP I'm at, and it's a huge happiness for me because it's a COP where the insurance market is no longer an accessory, and it's becoming a main actor, let's say, of the world that surrounds transformation, sustainability of our planet. So, Eugenio, thank you, Paula, all Marsh personnel, for having allowed me to be present here this morning, sharing a little bit of our experience together with these wonderful people who are here with me. We have 1 hour to tackle and treat a very important topic, and within this hour, it's paramount that we have a discipline because we have a lot to say and a short time. So we will go very briefly and start with Rodrigo from ICLEI, and he will help us understand an important part, which are the main challenges from the Latin American urban centers to become more resilient, and how urban transformation can help overcome everything. If you want to talk a little bit about what ICLEI is and what your entity's challenges are, I would appreciate, because many people don't know about the work you develop there. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to say thanks to Marsh McLennan for the invitation, CNseg for this beautiful house. I've been, since the beginning of COP, trying to reach this place, but I couldn't find a way to come. And with the provocations that André addressed to me, I'd like to talk a little bit about ICLEI and then the dimension linked to the challenges of Latin American cities. And I will close talking about the idea on how ICLEI is working on the perspective of complementarity, on the lack of insurance for the complementation agenda for the cities of the region. ICLEI is an association of local governments, and that means states and municipalities in Brazil, created 35 years ago at the UN by mayors, governors, invited by the Secretariat of the United Nations to create a group so that subnational governments would participate in Rio 92 on what today is constituted by the 9 sustainability agendas started in Rio conferences on biodiversity, desertifications, and climate change. And throughout these 35 years, ICLEI, that is in Bonn, Germany, head offices in São Paulo, Medellin, and Rosario. We have a group with more than 2,500 members talking about sustainability in a transversal way, in a shared way, and above all, trying to put implementation capacity in the agenda of the territories. On top of this idea of working both with fostering what Advocacy International for the municipality is doing, we are within the principles of COPs prepared for the conference of Rio. Since the first COP that happened in Berlin until now, in regional and local governments, we are present in COPs, always in the territories. I'm with Carla from CNM, an organization that works with the sensibility of the municipality inside the municipalities of Brazil, and we try to be connection points, and we cooperate with the international technical agenda. And that's where I will go back. We'll talk about the cooperation that we are having in a joint way with the insurance sector to find alternatives for implementation of effective implementations for the Latin American municipalities. Also, I will talk about the reality of Latin American municipalities. I know that I have expertise for infrastructures and implementation of the urban agenda in the entire region, but for some of you, I will be just reinforcing some points, but it's important that we start from a base. If we are in the most urbanized region of the world, and with the words that have been said in the beginning, with data that show that this urbanization happened in an intensive and non-controlled way, mainly in the 60s and 70s, and then complemented in the 80s, we have a strongly and heavily urbanized region. And the way that this urbanization happened, both due to the technical urbanization characteristic and the allocation of resources that happened in this urbanization, it is an incomplete urbanization. It shows the dynamics of inequalities because we are in the most urbanized region of the world and the most unequal region of the world. The combination of these two effects, the most urbanized and unequal, puts us in a clear space of what the average city of Latin America means. It's a city that reflects inequality in the urban design. It reflects inequality in the lack of basic infrastructure, mainly for the ones that are in the gap of the productive process. So we see the necessity to face the agenda and the low infrastructure that we have in Brazil and in Latin America in general. What has been performed in the last 30 years in Brazil in terms of funding infrastructure, mainly towards residences, understanding the urban design and the transportation system that are inefficient, not with efficacy. This process, although it has had, yes, an agenda of huge investment in the last 30 years, it still needs a capacity that it's linked to the lacks that the cities present. We have had some we have moved forward, mainly in the metropolitan areas where we advanced scores or rates on the access to water, sewage, worldwide, considering high populated country. In the beginning of the year 2000, we felt growth rate. And I reinforce that we are going through a phase of high investment in infrastructure in Brazil, both in the complementarity on the public side and from the private side. Although said all this, we are living a very fragile base. And then I try to show the perspective of climate perspective. Before, we were talking about indicators that we could actually compare around the globe, right? But how can we compare an element with the globe when calmly we have 13 billion in costs allocated to the basic costs for the reconstruction of the state of Rio Grande do Sul after the floods of May and April of 2024? How can we constitute the performance of this process, not only for what happened in 24 in Rio Grande do Sul, but it's important to reinforce that that state had its biggest flood in September 23, and it had its major asset attack in May 23. So the state of Rio Grande do Sul by itself is an example that in 1 year, approximately, we had 11 extreme events, extreme cases that created a wealth problem and losses of lives that we had in the state that were not understood as considered for that territory, although the South had the biggest asset or welfare losses, and it had also suffered droughts. According to the World Bank and Federal Bank. Said all that, we have a situation where the understanding on what urban planning is has to change, and the level of understanding of what public funding allocated and the agenda of public and private sectors have to change. And that's why we are very comfortable to show that the international agendas must complement this. And that's why we are with the organization that we are happy to be partners with for cities insurance that we are implementing jointly, KfW, the German Bank of Development, to understand opportunities and capacities where insurance within the urban structure will not be and will never be the silver bullet for adaptation, but a paramount element of complementarity of the arrangement for investment for climate adaptation in urban centers. The insurance is created, and it's a situation where, Ambassador, you come to the mayor, and some years ago, you wouldn't trust public activities for securitization aspects because they didn't understand the logic of insurance within a logic to solve the problems. And we have to emphasize that states and municipalities, the decision takers that are at the front. I always say that the person who decides to become a mayor, they have a very specific psychological aspects because all the problems of people's lives will come to the mayor. The water that is not on the faucet, the school that the siblings go to, these are on the municipal agenda. And if it is on the state or federal agenda, they will blame the mayor for sure. And within this role, they have to see innovative actions of what is understood as solutions for the main issues. It's very complicated. And that's why I believe we are doing a work, and we have to talk a little bit more about that. I know I'm running out of time. the project for facility constructions for urban locations, and these acronyms are great. EIF, the way that we are building agendas for Latin America to try to show the pain of municipalities on how they can understand the risk data and the constitution of insurance as a way to mitigate investment risks that, above all, have the capacity to protect the people who need most in extreme climate events. It's a way that we understand of responsabilization, and I will close with this terminology and with these words. I was with a friend from the Ministry of the Environment on Monday last week, and I told her that I stole this expression from her, and I am repeating. I focus that the idea of joint work takes me to the perspective that we have, above all, a co-responsibility. We have to understand the way our sectors and capacities have ways of becoming co-responsible. And within this perspective, I emphasize that by my organization, I understand the urban agenda of Brazil and Latin America, and we have space for co-responsabilization to create investment for the adaptation structure that is necessary for the cities of our regions.
Thank you very much, Rodrigo. Allow me to do a small cut here. I brought important information that almost 80% of the infrastructure in Brazil throughout the last 10 years has been done in collaboration, public-private. There are contracts underway, and this data is very important because it demonstrates the importance to be able to win this financing situation so that cities in Brazil can be resilient and sustainable. Yesterday, we were talking the infrastructure are done, but with project financing. And here, Gustavo, I know that CNseg is very close to all this movement, and congratulations to develop all this opportunity in the industries, the insurance industry, to be present here, very well represented. We have the conviction that without the protection mechanism, which is efficient, and risk transferring that is efficient also, it won't be possible that the investors and operators be able to get the proper financing, and the importance of the industry
como apoiador dessas iniciativas. Então, 100% de acordo, desafio que a indústria de seguros pode ajudar a superar e chegar e atingir o grau de sustentabilidade desejado. Embaixador Antônio,
Ambassador Antonio, in your opinion, what are the solutions in transportation innovative that are presenting, like mobility, have been contributing to sustainability and living in our cities? Good morning to all. I would like to thank to be here in the panel, the opportunity. I'd like to thank Casa de Seguros, CNseg. This is a conversation, an insurance city, urban agenda that we started a while ago. We're talking to Gustavo in COP28 related to this. And since then, the Ministry of Cities has been worried, the minister, to put in this agenda and the COP, the centrality of the cities. The only reason is not a matter of conflict of forest and cities, but simply that we're going to treat people, and it has been spoken initially that all these talks about people, about climate, and not about nature itself or infrastructure, but about people. I think it's central that the cities will be in the center of the talk, and the infrastructure, including the urban transportation, will be highlighted. I know they will look like an ant issue here that, I saw ants walking by and I was thinking about on the stage. So the first thing I thought about this ant walking here on the stage, we are a world of pedestrians. we walk, first of all. Before riding on a bus, on a car, on a motorcycle, we will walk. So the infrastructure, I don't see on the debates here that it's a urban infrastructure essential and a growing essentially in cities that will have to deal with the challenge of heat waves or other climate events or the sidewalks. So I'd like to everyone to think about a sidewalk as a urban infrastructure. To start here, the conversation I started already. I brought here the data of the investments from the federal government in mobility. The investments called New PAC, who doesn't know, it's the investment package accelerating, the growth accelerating for the public transportation. It goes around 45 billion. Yes. All of them are pre-selected. So that is the clients from these 45 billions are the cities in smaller scales and the state governments. 10 billion is to renew the buses here, to contribute to be zero emission or lower the emission. And we mapped already 187 projects with metro, subways, and electric buses and 21 major metropolitan cities. 430 billion necessary for the next 30 years that will allow to reduce, as you can see, tons of CO2. And we're mapped already 400 initiatives throughout the whole country. In the award Prêmio Brasil, so along with the sidewalk, it's the active mobility that we have as citizens that be more towards using the city. But then it comes three challenges, and I'm going to concentrate on those. And use less than 15 minutes here. It's a governance, a multi-level governance that we brought here to COP. The objectives, key objectives of the axles from the Brazilian cities, because we have cases that are incredible. For example, we have a subway in Rio that is managed by the state. That the buses and the metro, they compete on the same line, on the same path. And the buses, their majority out of diesel, they transport more passengers than the subway, that it's infinitely more sustainable in Rio. So there's a management problem in Rio that the federal government are unable to operate between the municipality, managers, the bus routes, and the subways. So São Paulo, there's a subway system more sustainable. But yesterday I was in an event that they were telling me they have approximately 25 cities, Chinese cities, that they have more kilometers in the last 20 years that were installed in the city of São Paulo, of the metro. Why can't we have public transportation massive in our great urban centers that are more sustainable in general? And the sensation that we've been looking, these different cases and the different cities, that this is not upon the reality between the governance between municipality and states and federal. There's a problem. There's another problem of mass transportation, public transportation, which is the matter of how do you do a cooperative arrangement between the different municipalities. So it's not a matter of investments of money, it's a matter of how do you work the logic of the governance for these systems. And it's a challenge that we need to think. We need to involve not only investments, but arrangements related to the private sector. What a insurance sector, what they're going to privilege, what has most risk, what's a better investment related towards management. That's how insurance work, generally speaking. Rodrigo reminded me of the great challenges, but I think this challenge is a challenge that involves a lot of elements. The public management, think about the cities more complex. The Brazilian cities, they're not so compact. I know there are a lot of people from São Paulo that think that the city of São Paulo is compact compared to Barcelona. São Paulo city, in terms of size, and population, it becomes a joke. São Paulo has approximately 20 times less people living by square kilometer compared to Barcelona. It's called our attention, and it's one of the most compact cities. When you take a look at the rest cities, it grows bigger. So this compact city, it's relevant because that's what it involves. How do you manage the public transportation? How do you manage the people that we know that the more compact they are, the less emission they emit, they issue. This challenge of public transportation is very relevant to us to think about this. The construction of compact cities that are less unequally. The Brazilian cities, the inclusion and public transportation, it's an inclusion management to include people. We have less neighborhoods, less to be able to use people so can use better spaces and they can commute better with public transportation, not only due to subways, trains, has to do with sidewalks to convince the people that it's preferable for them to get a subway or to get to their work instead of Uber or taxi or whatsoever, whatever choice that they have. The inequality related to the cities, the suburbs, we need to deal with the cities that were the space of 87-90% of the population they live. Brazil, it's radically a urban city in a region highly urbanized. And what I call people's attention, that sometimes they lose the perspective, it's Brazilian population, they establish themselves. Me with my gray hair, and like you see, we were turning to the average Brazilian. Brazil, it's not a country of young people, you know, but this is the truth. But people will be thinking about it. But the older population is growing by the day. The process of urbanization is still accelerated in Brazil. And I have the personal conviction, looking at the numbers of the IBGE and the dynamics, that we're going to reach to be 95% urban, because mainly on the agriculture part, people, they live in the city, they work on the fields, okay, but they live in the city. I live in Brasilia. They say, oh, Brasilia, it's a government city, but it's full of farmers, I know. I go there and I see the people that don't work on the government, on the capital here. There are people that they live there in Brasilia, but they work on the rural area around the city. The question is how we're going to do to transform public transportation, urban transportation, in a dynamic element of inclusion in our cities. So that involves investments more sensible, so these investments to be more sensible and more resilient. I think the insurance industry has a role and a value to add to this, and with the risk management and the logic of investment. And we tend to think that the insurance is a cost. Insurance is not a cost. It's a value, it's an investment. It's a management, risk management. And finally, on a perception that our cities need to be rethought, we need to rethink about. I think I exceeded my time here, so thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much, Ambassador Antonio, and maybe a path to be thought about is planning. If we're dealing with an investment volume that we have to do throughout the years, the coming years of a social and urban structure, if you know that this investment will come from public-private collaboration, what we need to do is to put into these contracts, public-private, in the area of mobility or infra-social, chapters dedicated to cities that are resilient, which the formulation of the CAPEX and the OPEX will have already this volume of investments, because once the operator that wins a concession of water, for example, doesn't have that has to do with sewage and distribution of water. That has to do the drainage of the water. It's not due on the contract on the chapter. It's hard to put in money to invest in that in sewage and water treatment. You don't deal with drainage, but the public-private contracts, they have to do with they deal with all these and subsidies, and we need to do that in the planning, the origin of the contracts, that we can walk this path. But in exit, some states, we were able to develop methodologies, resilient methodologies, mainly in the area of highways dedicated to resilience, roads and highways. We're going to treat that in our cities also. Thank you very much. Carla, how the implementation of the infrastructure, green infrastructure, in parks, squares, ways to store water and lighting, illumination, will bring the resilience that we're so longing for. Good morning to all. Thank you for the question. Before directing some of the questions you're answering, I'd like to thank CNseg, the President Diogo, Gustavo, Pedro, throughout the dialogues here, the Confederation of Municipalities here, we've been deepening our debates. We're going to talk about what is the Confederation of Municipalities. Federal Confederation of Municipalities is the greatest entities of the municipalities that are represented. We have 5,200 municipalities part of the project, so we're talking about challenges and cities that are more resilient. We're talking about a diversity and an inequality of capacity of these 5,200 municipalities in relation to the drainage, like Corrage and Ambassador Antonio, that he spoke about this before. Any questionings towards the drainage, without the private sector, there's no agenda of the adaptability in this country, especially when we talk about infrastructure. The budget, public budget, and estimates related to federal agents and state agents and municipalities, they're not able to make it viable in this environmental adaptation in Brazil. Not only in Brazil, but in many other countries. So we have here convergency, strategic convergency, that we need to be directed towards all public policies and global agendas, implementation of these global agendas related to municipality. Private sector, public sector, they need to walk together. To walk together more and more in this context, not in a partnership between public-private, but different arrangements, financial arrangements related to the private sector. When it comes to urban drainage, most of our cities, they don't have these drainage systems. There's big, small, and medium cities. We have sometimes some temporary solutions, but not as a infrastructure solution, punctual solution. When I refer to the private segments, it has infrastructure. The word urban drainage, it's something that it takes long, demands a lot of resources, something that has to be integrated to the urban planning, because you cannot make it the drainage structure viable if on the other side I'm building more and more commercial buildings and living and drainage that are not able to protect lives, protect businesses and people in general. So I need to marry these investments with drainage and to take the bureaucracy out of it. The financial modeling to urban drainage in our country. We came from investments that were reduced in urban drainage. We're hiring these investments towards urban drainage, but we need to integrate this urban drainage with politicians. When we comment a lot about the contracts with public-private contracts, we have some indicators or some mechanisms that do in a way that the agenda of adaptation, mitigation would be present in public policies, this is strategical. So it's important to think about solutions, innovative solutions, and contractual. On the other hand, also about insurance, Corrage, Antonio, that they were speaking before me, the insurance agenda, it's an important agenda. It's very important related to people that are affected. How can we think about arrangements and solutions? But more than this, it's fundamentally for us to think about this arrangement insurance towards public buildings, investments, public investments, schools, health system, hospitals, public hospitals. If I can't able to adapt these services that are public, these infrastructures, public infrastructure, it's almost a lack of service that comes from our pocket, from the investment that comes from the taxpayer. So I have a lot of buildings, public buildings. I'm talking about any kind of public services that in a way, the segment, private segments of insurance, they're able to protect these public buildings and to help to demand with the people. And when I have this modeling, the majority of these public buildings are affected and affect people, generally speaking. And on the other hand, I need to think about public investments to rebuild these buildings, to do these retrofits and the building of these buildings. And the lacks insurance in another catastrophes that once again it affects these public infrastructure. We have a window of opportunities beyond all this modeling of rebuilding in a way that the segment of insurance are able to model this rebuild, this public rebuild. So this is an important window. Maybe in this first moment, are able to walk faster, to go faster, about all the bureaucracy and a modeling in a short and medium term that becomes possible and viable. When we talk about a insurance modeling to help the population, and then we're going to talk about a path that requires a dialogue that is deep, that it seems in the first moment, it's to concentrate efforts and to align thoughts when we talk about insurance modeling to adaptation. One, beyond all, it's with the dialogue that we had between the states, the federal and municipality, because the part of these resources from rebuilding, it comes from the federal parts, and part of these federal resources, it goes for public infrastructures, and eventually in another disaster, these infrastructure, they were even rebuilt and they need new investments already for new rebuilding, reconstructing. So we have a lack of services from our resources here. So here I have the private entities as a strategy, and the insurance industry also as of the municipalities, the public service, how to let state government and municipalities, how to them to be aware that insurance is not cost, it's investment in a short and medium term, with resources that are more restrict, with not a lot of margins to invest in infrastructure, that I don't have a protection about the public infrastructure, that about this infrastructure that at first moment in a disaster, the population will need these infrastructures. Schools, clinics, public clinics, and some majority of them are collapsed at the moment. There's not a margin for a proper care to the public, to the population. So I'll stop here to give opportunities for the other people, and I'll be available, make myself available.
Carla, muito obrigado. Excelente ponto.
Carla, thank you very much. Excellent point. I've never thought about that. This theme, it co-creates a protection for the public spaces, and have the structured program that according to the bidding program, that there's a necessity of care to take care of the public spaces. Not all insurance, they have an area that it's ready to deal with these public in places related to bidding, but there's aspect that goes beyond that you talked about to the people to reflect upon and think about it. The collateral effect when a catastrophe happens in a city, that it's not a loss of this public service temporary or a public or private services, that the people, they don't have access to the infrastructure, social or urban context of quality, but the loss of this money that the state doesn't have anymore because from the taxpayer. So what happened? The state doesn't get this money from the taxpayers. Like it becomes a vicious cycle. So you don't have the active, the public or private, these assets, and they don't get this resource from the taxpayer. So we need to think about it, how to deal with this theme. Of course, the investments in resilient cities can be a factor of inhibition of this catastrophe. If we have the chance to invest in the planning, it'll be through concessions or public-private contracts of clear strategies and engineering, and resilient engineering. This is a factor of adaptation and mitigation of these risks. Thank you very much.
Permission to speak in Portuguese. Okay? Well, vamos lá. Na sua opinião, Emi,
in your opinion, Emi, how does insurance industry or market can support these initiatives that are being taken to build the cities, resilient cities, to become also sustainable? And if you're able to share within your professional trajectory examples that you've seen in other countries that are only Latin America, that we're able to inspire us in Brazil and to practice these new activities to search this resilient engineering.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. I'd like to start by thanking the country of Brazil and the city of Belém for hosting such an important meeting and doing it so well. It is an absolute pleasure to be here. I'd also like to thank my fellow panelists because I've learned so much from you and hearing so much. It's completely changed what I planned to say. So apologies, because there's quite a lot of what was said that I'd like to respond to. I think the points that you all made about the impacts of climate change, I think the economic impacts, the loss of revenues, municipal revenues as a result of climate change. There's a statistic in the US that's about 70% of small businesses in the US do not reopen after they experience damage from extreme weather. And so that impacts the tax base, it impacts the employment opportunities, it has many cascading effects. And so when we think about extreme weather, we often think about damage first and foremost, but you absolutely made the point about extreme heat and that we need to protect people from extreme heat. And what's the impact on our healthcare systems? Not just of people suffering from the direct effects of heat, but also the compounding effects of heat on existing illnesses. And so how does that get funded within the system? And one of the things we haven't really talked about is the impact of scarcity. Everywhere where we will see floods, we will invariably say drought. Actually, I think the floods in the south, I think you said the year before they'd had drought. And I don't think I can think of a single manufacturing process that doesn't rely on water in some way. And so all of those effects somehow manifest themselves. Now, you've all done my job for me in explaining the role that insurance has. There's first of all, the role that I think is really important of helping to quantify the risk. We are really good at pricing risk. And so by understanding the likelihood of an event happening, the amount of damage, we can put a cost on it. And once you've got a cost, you can understand the impact of an intervention. If you make an intervention, how does it reduce the cost to give you a return on investment, because the interventions have to pay for themselves. So I think that's a capability that the insurance industry need to leverage to help people know how to design better infrastructure. Because globally, we only have 50% of the infrastructure that we're going to need in 2050. So the infrastructure investments are going to be extensive, and we're still building, I'm going to say badly, we're still building assets that are not resilient for the weather to come. The other job it has is helping to support securing of investment. I think it was Mia Mottley said, the Prime Minister, the President of Barbados, I think it was last year that she said, a project that is not insurable is not bankable. And most investors will require insurance to be in place to secure the finance. So a really critical role there. And then finally, it has the role of providing the emergency liquidity, the funds that municipalities and the private sector need to respond in the moments that matter. And so that's where we've seen a lot of innovations in insurance, thinking about how to have insurance that can provide the emergency liquidity, that flow of funds that allows the government to support the people, provide the healthcare service, the shelter, the food that's needed in the moment. But it doesn't take away from the need to build the resilience that we need of the infrastructure, because it doesn't stop the damage from actually happening. But you asked for examples, so let me give you examples. This isn't a climate example, but actually no, there are two examples quite recently. There was an earthquake in Morocco that happened in 2023. Extensive damage and loss of life. And the government there for the municipality had bought what's called a parametric insurance. I'm an insurance house. I don't think I need to explain parametric insurance. But one of the things we like about parametric insurance is the speed of recovery. And so the government had a check of $150 million within 7 days that released resources to bring humanitarian aid and shelter to those communities, to make commitments to buy support services. And we saw exactly the same 2 weeks ago in Jamaica with Hurricane Melissa, where the government had exactly that kind of emergency financial protection that allows the government to respond in the moment. But it isn't just in the moment that we need to have the funds for. We need to have the funds for the rebuild. And this is an area where Latin America is very far behind. We think that there is a 90% insurance gap. So only $1 in $10 of damage in Latin America across the board is insured. So we know that there's this protection gap, which means that the financial resilience isn't in place to support the private or the public sector with the rebuilds after the damage happens. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. So I don't actually have many Latin American examples of where cities or private sector are using insurance for resilience. So let me give you a couple of examples from around the world. In the state of New York, Manhattan, the subway system is fully insured. Fully insured feels like a big word. I think it's probably significantly insured for damage as a result of inundation. So they are exposed not just to extreme rain, but also to coastal inundation, to sea level rise. They're putting in additional flood defenses. And so they insure that asset, recognizing that in the moment, that will be a very difficult rebuild to fund. There are government community schemes elsewhere in the US. In North Carolina, there's a community resilience bond that provides financial protection for communities. But really importantly, if the area doesn't suffer damage, the insurers give money back to the community to invest in resilience, to further reduce the risk. And so we're seeing more and more incentives from insurers, not just through providing the pricing signal, the difference in the cost of risk between a resilient building and a not resilient building, but they're also saying, and here is money back to help you do the work that you need to do. Because Carla, I love the point that you made about the stormwater systems and the drainage. An area that doesn't reflect so well on insurance, but I think cities should be aware. The insurer Tokyo Marine has sued the city of Durban in South Africa for not maintaining its stormwater drains. And they've sued them for close to $300 million that they say is the resulting damage because the stormwater drains didn't work. Now, I have no idea if that case has merit, but I think that's very consequential for city areas that insurers are looking to them to maintain a certain amount of physical resilience in their assets. So there are lots of intersections with insurance, and there are lots more places I could go. None of that was where I planned to start, by the way. One other point that I will make, so sorry, this is a bit rambling, but you all said such interesting things that I wanted to respond to. One area of concern that we also think that cities should be aware of is their ability to attract foreign direct investment. And I'm calling it FDI because that's what we talk about. But it's also happening domestically within countries where cities are competing for investment and for jobs. Increasingly, the private sector is assessing your resilience. And so not only do you need to have a way of communicating the work that you're doing, the private sector has to be able to access that, because I worry that the private sector, if they only have access to the hazard data, so if they can only see how bad the hazard is and they can't see the work that you're doing to build resilience, then they will select against you without you ever knowing. So to give you an example, the Southeast Asian supply chain, the Southeast Asian countries are very integral to the automotive supply chain. But there are cities that are very highly flood exposed that we know the automotive manufacturers are saying, oh, as I rewire my supply chain, do I want to go somewhere more resilient? And to give you an idea of the scale of the losses, a major US motor company announced a $1.5 billion loss 2 or 3 weeks ago because one of their aluminium manufacturers was flooded and they couldn't produce their most important vehicle. And so it's increasingly important to those investors to know that the cities that they are making investments in are making the towns resilient, so the assets are resilient, but are also providing resilience for the communities, because I promise you, buildings aren't very productive. They need the workers in them to be healthy and to be able to get to work to create the economic output. So another issue that I think, I hope that by working with the private sector, it can help cities to say, give another economic incentive for the actions that need to be taken as the private sector looks more deeply at their supply chains. But I want to give time for questions. So let me pause there, but very happy to go in any other direction.
I'll speak in Portuguese. Muito obrigado, Amy.
Thank you so much, Amy. You bring light to several questions we have here in Brazil, especially when you talk about the importance of risk analysis and the way we are also connecting to the planning and development of our contracts. And in this perspective, Marsh and I are concerned in collaborating with the state, municipalities, so that they can then introduce in their contracts the best way of having these risks being treated, and remembering that the risk matrix is the score is a core foundation so that we can become resilient. And moving towards the end, we are exceeding 10 minutes. Rodrigo, your final remarks, and then we will wrap up. Well, in a very simple way, I believe that when we talk about urban infrastructure and the risks, the way that they are shown and for the future years, I want to alert about complementarity for infrastructure, understanding the climate risks that are around us. And we have to observe other types of infrastructures with solutions based on nature, which is a demand that has been put by municipalities, investors. We help to promote that. My organization defends directly this cause as a complementarity way, mainly on fragile areas where we have cities under major risks, and the necessity that we have on insurance and infrastructure, and they can become partners to complement this agenda, an agenda that is working together with public ministries and trying to construct more resilient infrastructure within Brazilian cities, that will be an effort to understand that these infrastructures need to have complementarity with technique so that we can invest and mitigate the risks and protect population. Thank you, Rodrigo. Ambassador Antonio, please. Well, very briefly, 2 points to reflect from what we've heard. Someone told me some days ago in Porto Alegre, there was a plant that invested in resilience and it became dry and protected, but nobody went there to work. So there is an integration that is needed to be done amongst investors, city, infrastructure of the city. And a second reflection, which is we've had a lot in the ministry, which is the quality of investments. It's no longer possible to think and back to the sidewalk and the ant case. When we think about building a street, maybe asphalt is not the best solution. Maybe we have to rethink that street, that road, and it's a matter of cost. And here we needed the public authority to understand that the projects needed another quality, a more sustainable, more green or bluer or less gray. And the control also has to observe that cost has to be checked in different perspectives. This is about resilience, and we are far from doing so, and we need better projects, and that's the major projects. Maybe more expensive, but we need to convince public authorities, the municipal managers, the account controllers, the parliaments that these investments are worth, that they are important, that there is return, and insurance companies have a role. Carla, well, thank you. Thank you for this panel and for the speakers who shared so much, so many important points. Antonio shared an intelligence from the side of the public authorities in terms of contracts. And also it's important to think about inducers mechanisms. We've had some in other policies, insurance policies, not focused in resilience, that at first had a resistance, but then in the market it adhered. I'm talking about insurance against stopping constructions, actually. But I believe that the union government and the municipal public power should think about inducer mechanisms, because the private investor, when he has to think about solutions, as you're explaining, based on nature, whether for a building or any public infrastructure that will improve people's life quality, maybe the urban planning is not prepared for that because the urban regulation is not ready for that. I'm talking about building codes. We have to have a portfolio that will attract that constructor, the engineers, and it has to be linked to insurance. We have here an agenda, and I'll talk about the Confederation from the standpoint of thinking about resilient cities. For that, we have to improve our urban regulations for private investors, and that is not good yet. And I'm talking as an entity that represents municipalities. Our urban regulations need to actually embrace resilience, and from the standpoint of observing, and then I'm talking about the public power, and I'm talking about representation of municipalities. So we have a co-responsibility of thinking about improvement of regulations. inducer mechanisms, portfolios will attract the private sector from insurance also. If the municipal public power can have good projects, we can match that with insurance. So for public, for the usage of population, and also thinking about projects and mechanisms for the population to have immediate assistance. And then this goes to the public power, and it helps the social side. So serving immediately the population, and emissions don't happen per area. They are not only in São Paulo or Rio. Ambassador said it's for all. So this is co-responsibility, thinking about pricing. This is for all. So this is what I had to share. Thank you. Amy, your final remark.
I have a call to action for everybody, whether you're in the private sector or the public sector. If everybody puts in every tender that they put out that resilience is important, and you say, explain to me how your business is resilient, it shows our CEOs that that matters throughout the supply chain. And I don't think you need anybody's permission to do it. So I would encourage you to go back to your procurement, your supply chain team, get that one bit of contract wording put in, and we'll start to see change.
Thank you, Amy. Bom, pessoal, então estamos encaminhando para o final. Eu queria deixar pensamentos para vocês.
Closing, and I want to leave 3 remarks so that you remember what was said this morning. First, resilient cities require public and private investments, and the insurance sector, insurance market, Steven and Gustavo are the inducer and the enablers of these investments. And we have to keep those in mind. Planning is the key for success. All that has been said here depends on a review of the contracts, of the models, and the alternatives that we are developing to offer solutions. And I close by giving an example. My father was a physician, and he said, never take drugs or medications without listening to a doctor. We, in the insurance sector, have the same behavior as physicians. If you go to a physician, he will not tell you, take this drug. First, he asks some examinations, he does some trials, and then he defines your medication. So insurance also needs risk analysis, detailed analysis, and I reinforce the need for an insurance broker and the insurance industry to generate solutions for our clients, and then we will have a resilient engineering. Thank you to all who stayed with us and watched us through CNseg TV. I thank the participation of all of you in this first panel, and I will inform that today at 6:30 p.m. Marsh Lehman invites all to a cocktail.
E agora, dando prosseguimento à nossa programação.
Continuing our agenda, the next debate talks about the importance of nature and water. We will talk about strategies to protect biodiversity, restore degraded habitats, and foster sustainable practices. This panel emphasizes interconnectivity between the human well-being and the healthy environment, highlighting that preserving nature is paramount for future generations, climate resilience, and the health of the planet. We invite Mr. Isaiah Serminskit from Swenja, Serminskit from Marsh, McLennan. Sorry if I misspelled your name. Paulo Barreto, associate researcher from Amazon. Warm hands. A round of applause for our panelists. Lívia Laureto, researcher from IPAM. Deputy Fernando Monteiro from Republicanos, state of Pernambuco. Rodrigo Soares, climate and sustainability leader for Latin America from Marsh. I wish you all a good panel. Good morning. Thank you very much. My father was also a doctor, a physician, but he was an orthopedic doctor and traumatologist, so he managed crisis. His patients came with exposed bones, and he had to act really fast. It's a great honor to be here with you today, and I'd like to actually revise or revisit what was said by Eugenio about joint efforts. And when we talk, when he talked about building this panel for all, so we will listen to each other. And first of all, I thank CNseg because we will be able to learn a lot together. The insurance sector is positioning and is very solid at COP. We have our speaking place to offer solutions. And Plain has said about cities through Rodrigo, and we have a very interesting task. After talking about water resources, and in the previous panel, we heard about excesses and also lack of resources. Vania, you actually followed negotiations through years, and you can see now topics at COP30 that are complex and for the first time. So public financing, this is a topic that never ends. And second, adaptation indicators. So water resources is one of the most relevant ones, the lack, offer, demand, and so far. You have just led, Svenja, a document for Latin America with the Inter-American Bank of Development, where you found the adaptation gaps about this. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what you saw in terms of water resource?
Okay, thank you very much. And sorry for speaking English. I feel very incapable. I come to Latin America and I can't even speak Spanish, nor can I speak Portuguese. So apologies for that. I would like to start with, because you said I've been attending many COPs. That makes me sound very old. So thank you for that. But I have to congratulate, I think, the Brazil government and the organizers. I've been very skeptical. And after 10 days here, I actually really think they are doing an amazing job. The city itself, I mean, it's an amazing COP. I think the green zone is as vibrant as I've ever seen any green zone at COPs. If you haven't been there, go there. But I think with the negotiations, I mean, it couldn't come at a more difficult time. We have really tricky geopolitics. You know, we live with climate change. We have a lot of pressure. And if we're really lucky, there might even be some decisions tonight. And, you know, I was talking yesterday a lot with the negotiators. I don't know if it's realistic. They're pushing hard. But, you know, over the last couple of days, I've seen, you know, something in motion. And I hope I'm not going to be disappointed. But I think there are really tricky topics. I think we're discussing one here. But yeah, so at the moment, I'm optimistic. But, you know, it's COP30. The journey will continue, unfortunately. So one aspect, I think, that really stands out for me is that in my previous sort of experience, I had to explain what adaptation and what resilience is. I no longer have to do that. And I think unfortunately, it is because we are experiencing the need to do it. It's no longer an option, it's a necessity. And climate change is here. We can see it. We can see it in Belém. I mean, the city this is a report we wrote with the Inter-American Development Bank, and it looks at the adaptation deficit and all the challenges that Latin America and the Caribbean are facing. And just as a key message, one of our assessments shows that just by temperature shocks alone, we expect, if we don't do adaptation, the whole continent to suffer a GDP drop by 10% by 2050. And that doesn't even consider extreme events such as wildfires, such as floods, such as drought. It's just from extreme temperatures. And I mean, that just underlines that this is not really an option. It's not an environmental issue. It's an economic issue, and it's a big social issue. So that's really the key message that comes out of this. Water, and that's kind of something I think we want to unpack here. Water is a key feature in the report. And I mean, I don't really have to remind you of, the importance. We heard that in the other panel here. But just to say, I think Uruguay lost in their recent drought, I think 60% of their crop yields due to water issues, due to lack of water. And, lack of water has become an issue for migration. So a really big social aspect. And it has a big impact on any supply chain, on any sort of, production cycle, if you like. So it couldn't be more important. And even here in the Amazon, we see the huge impact droughts can have on navigation. We've also worked for the Panama Canal. We looked at drought and lack of water becoming actually a challenge to navigate this really important route. So the list goes on. But I think the upbeat message that comes out of this report, and I think that's kind of the upbeat message for all of us, is that adaptation is doable, and it's something, well, we should have done it years ago, but we still have opportunity to do it, not just because we should do it, because it makes economic sense. It creates a lot of co-benefits. If we do it smartly, it just not only reduces losses, but it can create welfare, it can create social benefits and natural benefits. And that's particularly in the water context. We need these smart solutions that bring together nature, communities, and also businesses. And that's my last point as a really key takeaway from COP. It's this idea of bringing together different communities. So people say it's the forest COP, or it's the insurance COP, or it's in the indigenous COP. I think it needs to be the COP of all of those, because a lot of the solutions require, understanding local needs, the data, the tools that often insurers bring to it, the financial needs, the economic rationality, and then you can have long-lasting solutions. So we'll unpack a couple of, but I said we shouldn't talk too long. Now I'm talking long. So I have a long list of examples, but I want to hear from others first.
Svenia, muchísimas gracias. Tocas varios temas muy relevantes que aparecen.
Thank you so much. You've tackled on such important points, but you mentioned we have the risk report from Marsh and where observed risks are extreme meteorological events, the lack of natural resources, and the resources that are on the limit. So it's very important, Paulo, to be able to connect, link to science information for decision taking. Then I would say that I would ask, are you playing the role of generating this information in order to build based on data and information? So I'd like to hear from you what is happening in the territory, what's happening in the Amazon region, and how we can advance on that. Thank you. If you can show my slides. First of all, I want to thank the opportunity. The insurance sector is the one that takes climate changes very seriously. There are still people denying that, but due to the direct contact with this issue, you have a key role. And I want to start with this graph that shows the water balance since 1950. This is governmental data until last year. And we see that since 1990, we have suffered a water deficit from rain and what happens as evapotranspiration. And the more time passes, the risk increases. So this implies energy generation, or also implies the agribusiness that is very important in Brazil. So we are on an adaptation period involving the insurance sector. If you remember, if you have to take home something, this graph is the most relevant one for you to take home. Livestock is the sector that is most responsible for the emissions. You can also see in this graph, and it is far more linked to the emissions, whether by the deforestations or methane emissions. And the graph I showed first, the water deficit is related to deforestation that decreases rains, and global climate change, which is the raising temperature. The Brazilian Central Bank identified that livestock sector is more exposed to transition risks. And you can see in red, it's highlighted cattle ranching and milk cattle or dairy cattle for the transition. And our central bank is launching and highlighting the sector. We know the companies that are most exposed in this sector. They're related to the meat packing, the location of meat packings, the size of the cycles, the degree of exposition of risks that they have in terms of deforestation. And we understand what are the companies located in this region. So the sector of insurance can be key while engaging with these companies, showing the risks they are exposed to and the costs associated to that. Another thing we do is to show for each company what they have said against deforestation, which is the sector that is most exposed to risk, the meat packing plants, their risks and what they are implementing. You see in green, and green means some are doing some controls. The farms sell cattle directly to them, and the red dots show that generally the companies are not doing a control since the origin of the cattle. So they are associated or linked to deforestation. So the orange shows that the control is not close to what is necessary. The red shows the exposition to deforestation risk. And this is a tool that companies, the insurance companies, can use to say, we are involved with such and so companies, with insurances in a direct way. What are the precautions we have to have with the insurers? Let's say we have to understand the policies that you have. My insurance will be more expensive because we have deforestation. Brazil has detailed information, and I am available to give you more details after we finish this panel. Thank you so much, Paulo, for exposing this and for sharing this with us. And this information is so important for decision taking. Now, Livia, I'd like to hear from you and from what we are exposing in terms of challenges in the Amazon. We understand that Amazon has several issues. Deforestation is one of them that affects the water resources. We have heard about energy generation, and Ecuador is involved. The water supply as consequence for the Amazon deforestation. So we heard recently at COP30 an initiative that Brazil has called Tropical Forest Facility, which is an intention to have $125 trillion for forest conservation and to serve what Paulo was saying. How do you see all that? How can you participate? And how do you think that the insurance sector can involve themselves and make these aspects more dynamic? Is it on? Good morning. My name is Livia Laureto. I'm IPAM researcher. I'm a biologist, and today I will contribute to this very important debate, talking about the experience of IPAM working with forests and bringing some information on TFFF. TFFF, which is Tropical Forests for Every Framework, is a global finance proposal to keep the tropical forests standing. And why this idea? These forests have ecosystemic services that benefit the entire planet, such as maintenance of biodiversity, water cycles. And then we have this new idea that we should have a finance fund so that these forests would be kept standing. And there are some important topics related to TFFF. Some elements are permanent and forecasted payments by results on deforestation or coverage of the tropical forests that will keep the ecosystemic services regionally, nationally, or globally, and the integration in national agendas to combat land grabbing, and we've seen gaining power in some years. And how can Brazil contribute to the mitigation of climate crisis and the relation with TFF, actually avoiding squatting as well? And at COP, we are checking how we are making the destination of non-destined forests. We have worked with these forests. We have one platform observing the public forests. We have Amazon Standing Initiative to observe this forest because several people don't know this forest. We're talking about public domain forests that belong to everybody that haven't had a legal destination. And they should be destined for purposes that will keep the forest standing, whether to make the full conservation or for sustainable usage. And these forests add 50 million hectares in the Amazon biome. They store more than 5 billion tons of carbon. And these forests have been a frequent target and the main target in Brazil of land fraud and fires. And then I would say that we have lost these forests for a while. They are having gas emissions that contribute to the climate crisis, and we need a fast destination or solution so that we can keep the ecosystemic services. We have to keep the stored carbon, allowing these forests to run their water regulation, the rain regulation that nationally impact our agriculture. We have followed several moments of crop breaches due to water standards or patterns. All that is helped by these forests that help minimize
dos impactos na agricultura. A gente tem
the
também
impacts on agriculture, and we also see the importance of these forests for traditional communities and populations. In the Amazon, we have several communities and traditional populations that survive from the forest. And these forests have a very important role for these communities. And linking the insurers and the insurance sector, as I've said, we've seen a huge impact in Brazil in the agricultural sector, climate extremes, jeopardizing harvests, the change in rain standards, actually affecting productivity, and that affects also our economy. And with the maintenance of the forest, the destination of a forest represents an important strategy, not only from the social point of view for these traditional population communities, but from the climate point of view, talking about carbon stock, and from the perspective that is the economic one, thinking about the relation with rain standards and the Brazilian economy, giving a major climate stability that would be good for the insurance sector in Brazil, especially towards agriculture, but thinking about the climate in big cities, thinking about the floods that affect insurance. And I am available to continue this talk if you wish after this panel.
Muchas gracias. Y tocabas un par de temas bien relevantes y quisiera, Fernando, contarte algo que pasó durante este año. Y es, el presidente Lula fue el presidente del G20 el año pasado y una de las declaraciones que se obtuvo ya fue la importancia de la bioeconomía como tal.
Economía, the economy is a point of view with potential for growth. And in this way,
cómo esa bioeconomía
understand how is this bioeconomy will have this coverage and these different members to advance in this theme. This theme was very forward. CNseg took advantage also to congratulate everyone that's involved here in this study. And what seems to be that a lot of opportunities for this region in the tropic to push this bioeconomy. So to align with what they were saying before, but sometimes the worry end up being the decision related to COP30, the decisions, and sometimes it's hard. It doesn't reach every citizen. So you're on every commission, subcommission, leading debates, proposals. How do you see these themes that were to regulation of the proposals of the laws and other aspects.
Primeiro, bom dia. É prazer e uma honra estar aqui hoje.
First of all, good morning. To be here
COP,
today
eu sempre
in
gosto de usar
COP,
uma palavra
I always like to
para
use this
falar
word to
a
start
forma que eu
speaking,
falo. Porque eu
and
sou gago,
every time I
e
speak,
eu preciso
because
ter uma
I
palavra para poder
stutter,
segui-la. Então,
so I
primeiro,
need
bom dia.
we need to have harmony before. Before any movement
Para frente, a gente tem que fazer uma
forward,
avaliação.
we need to do a evaluation. We're here in Belém do Pará,
Mais de 40 ilhas.
but over 40 islands, they don't have water and sewage system.
Ilha sem
It's
água.
it's a data, you know, island without water and without sewage system.
Porque
So we need to think about that. First of all, when we talk about harmony, who lives in the island, who lives in the city, who lives in the forest. So we need to have that harmony, that balance. So we need to, in the National Congress, we need to do public policies for the same reason, to create the synergy between cities, between the forest, and between the islands. And for us to have a social economy from the island, for example, we need to have there a condition of living, minimum condition there. I don't believe that no one lives in a world without water. Potable water. We need to have projects like we're having here, a project that we have here from the Federal University of Pernambuco, the trees that the reuse of the rainwater. So debates like this, that we need to make. We need to talk about this. We need to do a debate, a planning with the universities, but it doesn't matter that this growth, that it's unorganized, because it impacts in the environment. It impacts mainly when you grow in a city that unorganized, it creates a environmental impact very big. So COP serves for us to debate on these subjects, but mainly to get out of these ideas, to take these ideas out to be implemented. We can't just be talking, chatting here, and the Congress being receiving debates after debates, but we need an idea that we can put into practice. The reuse of the water, it's something practical. In the Northeast, we have the Caatinga, that we need to be treated also. We talked about here, there's a lot of water, and over there in the Northeast, there's a lack of water, almost zero. On the state of Pernambuco, at the same time, we have on the capital serious problems with the amount of rainfall, and on the arid parts, the serious problems for the lack of potable water, lack of rain. So I defend first to revisit the potable water issues. We need to talk about potable 4 pillars: water, sewage, solid waste, and drainage. So those are points that the National Congress needs to be fought on the area, on the hydro area, and catastrophes also. Second, we need to have a public policy. I'd like to leave a data here. You guys are from side. We have 10 million Brazilians without a bathroom. 10 million Brazilians in the country without a bathroom. It's part of the social economy. It's this data we need to spread, so that people be aware of our situation. So, and the insurance industry walks into this, because they have the condition, and they spoke previously to give diagnostics and to give a perfection for public policy, to align with a perfection, to give quality public policies, because I understand that the insurance industry, it's a accessory from a budget, from the companies, from the public, from the state, from the federal government. It gives the diagnostics. If something is diagnostic, if it's right or not, we need to evaluate, because they're specialists in mitigating risk, to establish risks. We had classes about environment. I'd like to leave my word here that we're debating this project here, and then from Belém, from the governor of the states. I don't know, with potable water, rain.
podendo minimizar o risco do ambiente, vamos ver lá no Recife, ou em cidades.
For example, in Recife, they have a lot of hills and cliffs on the cities, even.
Encontrar o solo. Isso diminui.
So it diminished the captation, the storage of water or the drainage of the land itself to keep it stable and the soil fresh. So that's what we need to talk about. We had a president that called Juscelino Kubitschek of the public has no compromise with errors. So we need to transform this debate and reality and law. We need to have harmony between environment and something sustainable so we can have a different moment. Because starting from now on, we need to live with adverse climate effects, and we need to be ready to live to deal with these life laws related to disasters that will happen. Thank you very much.
Fernando, muchas gracias. Y bueno, tocas varios temas ahí. Hablamos de armonía.
So when you talk about a lot of themes about harmony, I liked about the matter of accessories that they use, that insurance are accessory, considered accessory to deal with these. So I like to talk with Sonia, that you talk about these accessories that are innovative, that could help these kinds of situations. We talked about the relation already, about their coverage, the forest coverage, the scarcity of water, the floods, public, private, partnership. What do you see? What did you see in the world? What have you seen in the world that are innovative in a way that, oh, okay, so this could help to solve some of the problems that we've been speaking to this moment?
Well, I think, to put it very bluntly, what I see is happening is that we move from insuring risk to ensuring resilience. So, and I think that is really where we need to be, because adaptation and resilience are essential to also keep risk insurable. Yeah. So without adaptation and resilience, a lot of insurance solutions won't be possible in the future. So that's a really important starting point. So I think the insurance sector brings three things to this discussion and can help in three different ways. So one is, and we've heard this again and again, it's focusing on the understanding of risk and the data. And, it is true, insurers and the whole sort of insurance community, they are based on data, on analyzing risk, on understanding it. But even for our sector, climate change poses a big challenge, and we have to recalibrate our tools and our models. And that costs a lot of time and effort. It also costs a lot of money. So often people think insurers just press a button and we see it all there. So it takes a lot of effort. One example is colleagues from Guy Carpenter have just launched a flood model for Brazil. So you would think, well, of course, we will have had a flood model for years and years. No, because it takes a lot of time and a lot of efforts to collect the data and work with it. But what we see is that more and more of these sort of tools are becoming available. And when you say flooding, there are also now tools on droughts. So Marsh has developed its first drought risk assessment tool. So I think what really needs to happen is that these tools are getting used, not just by insurers, but by industry, by businesses, by cities, by governments. And that's where I spent a lot of time to actually bring these tools, because that's really the starting point. And I can't tell you how often, people look at me, be that a city. So we're doing a lot of work with ICLEI, who were here on the panel, Marsh and ICLEI and Guy Carpenter, to understand infrastructure risk. You have to spend half a year to just assess where the infrastructure is, how it is exposed to different types. It takes time, but it's a really important component. And once that's been done, I think a lot of decisions and choices about where you build, how you build, will hopefully become clearer and can be more resilient. So that's the data side. The other side is, insurers bring protection, and the protection gap is huge. If we don't do adaptation resilience, it will get bigger. So what we also need is innovative insurance solutions. And what we were discussing here in the context of, for example, drought, there are innovative solutions, for example, parametric solutions for farmers that help to assess, the risk and provide not only payouts, but often also advice on the timing of plantation or the type of crops and so on. So there is already an element of using the tools to inform and to help those who are taking insurance who are at risk to become more resilient. And, there are many examples of this across the region. Other examples are really around designing innovative public-private approaches to insurance. So we see this, some countries have chosen to insure their infrastructure. We see this in the Caribbean for the big catastrophe risk. What I think we could consider is how similar solutions would be possible around water and drought risk. Because, it can be done. We have the pool solutions such as CRIF in the Caribbean. So I think that's where the innovation, is possible. And then I think the third point is around finance and helping to get more investment into adaptation and resilience, and make sure that whatever is being invested considers resilience and adaptation, because that's the cheapest way of doing it. So if you decide I have either a big infrastructure project, or I think about, sort of choosing a location for my factory, or I think about, my city, what I need to prioritize. A lot of these decisions do not take into account future risk. Yeah. So you might make investment decisions that are actually maybe fit for today, but not fit for the future. And I think what we're seeing, insurers working as investors with cities, with other sort of industries, bringing together innovative, sometimes public-private solutions to actually help channel more money into adaptation. And there are, sometimes these are not easy. They take time to be developed. But I think it's really important, because if you are investing in, let's say, new infrastructure, but you do not consider how the climate is going to evolve over the next 10, 15, 20 years, in my mind, you're wasting, there's a huge potential that you're wasting a lot of money by not doing that. So I think the idea is to be smart and to bring together investors who have a really good understanding, and to maybe take away some of the risks they would face from these projects, insure some of that, and make it attractive. So I think, that's our three areas. And I can see that with big potential for Latin America and the Caribbean. There are good examples to learn from other regions, but I think I'm really inspired by, the sort of almost appetite that I feel here in my conversations. So hopefully that will be one of the takeaways, that we actually see more of the risk, data sharing, product innovation, and sort of bringing investment into adaptation.
Muchas gracias, Fenia. Y de pronto quiero complementar, porque digamos en Latinoamérica hemos visto.
Thank you very much, and also like to complement to the Latin America. I like to advance in parametric insurance disruptive the perspective of products and how they're not able to administrate water issues. So there are two themes: carbon credit, to guarantee carbon credits, these projects that to be generated, and starts also sustainable to build this vision, talk about the city with the presence of Antonio as an ambassador. And very interesting how to get this mix of resources. And thank you for explaining this to us. In this way, I'd like to Paulo to comment something that we saw recently in the COP, to a very important announcement of the states here from the Amazon. Let's work with we need to structure solutions. We talked about cities, supported by the Inter-American Bank of Development and BID. And when we're talking about these cities in the Amazon, it has to do a lot while we've been working, how we incorporate this infrastructure, green infrastructure, that we start arguing. And in the cities, the work that you've been doing about information, for the forest, that propose cities that are dependent from the river. There are 5 million people here, for example, in Belém, 3 million in Manaus. So they're big cities from the Amazon. How do you structure all this? And about the forest in front of what we've been seeing in this perspective. Thank you very much.
Well, cities is very important, but I do participate on a group where there are relevant information on cities, and the majority of the Amazon population, more than 75%, lives on the cities. And in general, they live in precarious situations, and they have several problems in terms of concessions in the vulnerable areas. And somehow I'm pessimistic in terms of the local powers to have this planning power. Even the representative of the Confederation of Municipalities spoke before on the role of some organizations to have a role of induction. Several organs can fund, such as public banks, Caixa Econômica, IDB, and other organs such as the Supreme Court of the Union. And I see this bigger, the Court of Auditors, actually, and they have a possibility to decide locally. And then we also have co-participants that can have a relevant role. I have followed what has happened in the United States in terms of areas that are no longer served by the insurance due to high frequency of fires and floods. So this sends us an alert. Also due to the type of constructions and adaptation. So these institutions that have an induction power are very relevant. Thank you. The same question to Tanya. Well, I believe that adaptation, and we are living a global moment where adaptation is necessary. We cannot escape from thinking about getting adapted, considering all that is happening from the climate perspective, both locally and globally. And I do have a view that is similar to Paulo's view. I believe that mainly in our reality in Brazil, we feel a certain difficulty to implement with efficiency measures that bring real and fast results. And it's also important what said about thinking about an adaptation that considers the climate in years to come, because only adapting now, understanding that we are living a situation, but the climate is changing. So imagine, we have all this work trying to mitigate this raising temperature, the climate extremes, But we also know that this climate will remain like this, but then it will change. I agree that the main funding organizations are key, and this is something that I don't clearly understand, but there is a movement trying to analyze better the environmental impact and authorizing financings or fundings for agriculture or for municipalities. And I do believe that we have to have an interface between the academy and institutions with the private sector and the government as well, to exchange information and find a way to take adaptation measures in order to bring more effective and quick results for the safety of population and for climate safety. And simultaneously, we have to continue searching for mitigation measures, helping forests, avoiding land frauds, check and to actually deal with the speed that the climate changes are happening, and also to be able to deal with all the extreme events we've lived with.
Todo llega a Fernando porque nos están diciendo la necesidad de financiamiento.
Fernando, we are talking about needs for financing, how to incorporate decisions of public policies to better conditions on climate adaptation. Svenja was giving examples, mixes between public and private. She also told us about awarding resilience. So the question here is, what do you see? What's your opinion? What can we do to advance in this direction? Well, first we have challenges. So I would say that first is the speed of the law being regulated by the federal government. So we have approved carbon credit, but we still don't have a regulation for carbon credit. And a second thing is to plan for 50 years, and we don't have this habit in Brazil. Usually, the planning we have is for the next Minister of Planning is on the file. So we have to have an orderly planning. We should have planning for 50 years. Secondly, we have to have an incentive for agriculture or infrastructure to use less areas with more productivity. An example, the soil, well-worked soil can produce much more. So it doesn't need to increase area for production. We can create cattle in smaller areas, so we don't need to expand and use more area. And this needs planning. And we need private policies working together. And we have to have the central government settling metrics for municipal and state governments. And I would say that Brazil is living a different moment. We live in municipalities, right? We live in municipalities. So we give a lot of obligations to municipalities, but a little budget. And that doesn't help, because I can't put a war there if I don't have money to fight. So first, I have to have a law project that will be planned for 50 years. This is urgent. The speed where a law can be voted in the National Congress and it can be regulated. So we have the 88 Constitution with laws that until today haven't been regulated. So this changes the planning. I'm talking about almost 40 years of the Constitution that hasn't, there are things that were not implemented. In order for you to have a harmony and climate interaction, we need investment also in research, and this is necessary in Brazil. Research makes a difference, and I do believe that the speed of the laws and awarding, because we don't have this habit in Brazil, awarding and giving awards for the ones that produce more in smaller areas is important to keep, because Brazil has fought drought for a long time. And when you start to live with that situation, you start planning and you start to plan public policies for social development and environmental development. And that's planning for 50 years. So no political speech works without being efficient. And I make a request. Next year, we have elections. When you talk about public policies, talk about government plans that can be put in place immediately. You know, let's not dream and not make things happen. We have to think of these small things. We have to talk and make things become real.
I want to briefly reflect on this, because I think the certainty of, that there is a plan, there is a policy, and it will be implemented is really important for businesses. And I think what I see in other countries happening is that investors are increasingly demanding from either the city, but sometimes also the national government, to see, evidence of them taking this serious. So they are actually starting to demand, if I invest in this country, in this locality, in this community, I want to know that, the responsible authorities are taking it serious. I think that's important. What we need to make sure is that they can then work together and sort of harness this and build adaptation together, because you also, often communities are concerned that they will get penalized for the risk. So they often don't want to share the data, because they say, oh, if investors know how risky it is, they won't come. So let's not tell them about it. I think that might have been the case 10 years ago. That won't work anymore. So we need to work with communities, with cities, with the national government to actually take the data more constructively and say, we are doing things so you can invest here. We're open for business. We might have a flood problem. We might have wildfire problems, but we are dealing with it. I think that's a really important narrative.
Gracias. Pablo, ¿qué quieres complementar allí también?
Yeah.
Paulo, do you want to add? Well, we have a research study that promotes data due to this condition that sometimes the public power or the private sector fears data and the consequences. So the role of research is very relevant as an ally to the insurance sector. And if I may ask a question, because you've mentioned about the idea on ensuring resilience, and I do believe this is very relevant. I'm not sure if this is an approach that you have launched right now as a plan for the future, or if you have approaches that are practical ones on how to do this combined to the public and private sectors.
There are ways to bring insurance into this mix. So one is resilient bonds, where you have on one hand the protection. If something goes wrong, you get a payout. But there's also a way of, if you are not experience a loss, you will still get some money that gets invested in resilience. So that's one example. Or after a loss, rather than just giving someone the money, to work with them to actually rebuild in a more resilient way. To me, this is an absolute no-brainer. Unfortunately, it's really only now starting to become a reality. And we sometimes call this building back better. I think it should be building back more resilient and green and more sustainable and all of that, because it's horrible enough if a disaster happens or if you lose your home or your business due to a fire or a flood. But I find it's absolutely irresponsible to just rebuild it. I think, so what we need to do is really bring this, and I think, us in the insurance sector also have that, that role to advise on what can be done to not just avoid a future loss, but also make actually the business more resilient going forward.
No sé, ¿algún comentario adicional?
Any comments to be added from Livia, Fernando? We still have a minute. And then we can check if the audience has questions.
Parece que no hay ninguna
It seems that no questions.
Temas sobre los cuales
We've covered several topics today, and we will need to continue working on that. The first one is on the insurance sector. We will lead these conversations, and this is something that is a novelty. It's not something that historically happened or that happens frequently. We are having an area to talk about insurance for several days, and this is something extremely modern, We will have in Australia another house of insurance to continue this talk. It doesn't matter where next COP will happen. The first point is this one. This planification and this vision is very relevant. This planification should come holding hands with public policy so that it can advance, and the articulation amongst different actors so that we can take the right actions with countries. And it's paramount to be able to advance in these processes. And at last, today there are innovative and differentiated solutions that we didn't see before. We were talking about parametric cycles. Also, in the previous panel, they dimensioned some points. Today, we are in the Brazilian territory, so the work is led by CNseg, Eugenio, and Marsh. So definitely, it's a way that we are going through, and Fernando was mentioning that to dynamize certain things, and we have lots of take home. So thank you for being here today, this morning. Thanks, panelists that are with us. We will continue enjoying today, and thank you very much. Thank you to all participants and Marsh McLennan for these two excellent panels that we had this morning. Remember, at the end of the day, we'll have a cocktail, and you're all very welcome. And I thank all the supporters of the Casa dos Seguros, Allianz, AXA Bibis Seguros, Caixa Seguridades, Bradesco, Mafre, Porto, Prudential, and Tokio Marine. Now we will have a break for lunch, and at 3 p.m. we will be back with our agenda. Thank you. Good afternoon.